Hey, I'm Caleb with YouCanMakeThisToo. Thank you for joining me. Today I'm going to show you how I made this ugly little box. My youngest son has been on a pretend treasure kick lately, and I've been looking for a simple welding project to play with my new welder. So it seemed like a great idea to make a simple treasure chest as a last-minute Christmas present for him. Now I did this project over 2 days, but this could easily be an afternoon project, or probably done a lot quicker if you're not a complete novice welder like I am. This is my second time TIG welding and first time doing a welding project solo. The first one was a stainless steel fireplace grate I did with my buddy Eric, and I'll link that video below. Now the 1-inch angle iron I'm cutting is from my local big box store, which isn't an economical option if you need a lot of steel, but it isn't bad for a small project like this. I'm not a big angle grinder fan, so I also picked up one of Diablo's new Steel Demon blades so I could cut the steel with my circular saw, and I was super impressed with how well it cut. That said, as a rule, cutting steel with wood blades is a great way to end up with pieces of broken carbide teeth embedded in your body, so get a blade meant to cut steel or just stick to cut-off wheels. Once everything was cut, I used my grinder to put some bevels on the joint to have space to fill up with weld. Granted, my cuts weren't at the perfect angle, so there was plenty of gap in the joint already without the bevel. I used some magnets to hold everything together and make sure that all the corners were square despite my angles and lengths not being consistent. Then I set to welding up the bottom frame. I put some tacks on all the corners to hold them together before welding the entire corner. If you're an experienced welder, please feel free to comment with suggestions on anything you see I can improve on. One thing I can pass along though is the importance of tack welds. Welding introduces a lot of heat to the metal. I mean, it's creating a puddle of molten metal. When that puddle cools, it contracts, which introduces a lot of pressure into the piece. The pressure from tack welds generally isn't enough to pull your pieces out of alignment, but if say I had welded an entire corner without already tacking the other corners in place, then the tension from that corner cooling would have pulled everything out of alignment with so much force that there's no way I could possibly pull them back into alignment. With the base rectangle welded, I moved on to adding the uprights. The metal in this is just going to serve as a frame, then I'll add some wood panels to make up the sides and lid. Again, I used magnets to hold the metal in place as I applied some tack welds, and then followed up by welding the entire seam. After I had the uprights welded, I switched to cutting some flat bar that'll go around the top of the box. This will give something for the lid to meet up to and a place to weld the hinges on. When I got to this point, I remembered that TIG is a really finicky process. It's the most sensitive of all welding processes. So besides my poor technique, one of the things working against me was that I hadn't ground off the mill scale near where I was welding. Mill scale is the sort of skin that develops on steel as a byproduct of how it's manufactured, and it often contains contaminants that will weaken a weld. Now for this project, strength isn't as much as a concern as, say, welding water lines for a nuclear power plant. I mean, bubblegum would probably be strong enough for this, but I thought if I prepped the material better, then my welds may look nicer. Now, I was wrong, but I figure it's always good to get in the habit of doing proper material prep first anyways. Now off camera, I set up the angle iron for the lid on top of the box structure and used the magnets to hold everything in place and tack welded them. I figured it was less important to make sure that the lid is perfectly square so much as it would be making sure that it perfectly matched the top of the box. One of the things I learned during this project was that I was trying to move too fast. Often I'd start trying to add filler metal to the weld before I had a puddle formed. That is, before I'd introduced enough heat with electricity from the torch to melt the metal into a molten puddle. So I took a breath and started slower, waiting to see a puddle form before adding metal and moving the torch along the seam, and that helped me a lot. The other thing that was helpful was remembering that I was working on a pretend treasure chest, a small box, not massive I-beams on a skyscraper, so if I was in a bad position, I could just move the piece and make a prop to rest my hand on. You know, there's no need for the contortions or floating my hands out in space that I had been doing. Once I finished the lid frame, I used some magnets to hold the back of the lid flush to the box, and then used a grinder to remove the mill scale from where the hinges would get welded on. Then I welded those on, just a tack and then along the seam. These are just some cheap weldable hinges that I ordered off Amazon, and I'll have a link for them below. With the box structure done, it was time to prep the wood. For the panels, I'm just using a cedar fence picket. I like the look of cedar, and it's light, so it's not going to add much weight because the steel already did that. And fence pickets are dirt cheap. They're also really rough though, so I ran both sides through the planer to smooth them out before cutting it down off camera into the pieces I needed, but you could also just sand these down to get them smoother. For the panels that go inside the box, I cut them to be super snug and just friction fit them in place, then added some CA glue in the seams for a little bit of insurance, but that was probably unnecessary. To attach the top to the lid, I just used some polyurethane construction adhesive. Now, if you think I didn't take wood movement into account, you're right. But pieces this size are barely going to change with the seasons, and for a variety of other reasons, I'm not worried about it, but you can be if you want to. Now, after grinding down all of my ugly welds, I took it outside and sprayed on 3 coats of clear enamel to seal the wood and metal. Now, she's not much to look at, but my kid was really happy with it on Christmas morning and playing with it since then, and it was good welding practice for me. Best of all, something like this is supposed to look kind of rustic and imperfect anyway, so my poor welding just adds to the character instead of detracting from this project. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing if you're not, and if you really enjoyed this, please do comment, like, and share. Now, if that's too much to ask, then an alternative is buying my plans or giving me money through Patreon, which gives you free access to my plans at a certain level. Anyway, until next time, make time to make something.